How government literally drives people insane. The most effective way to change the world is to raise your children properly. Everything could change in one generation if there was a radical shift in parenting. Unfortunately, some indicators suggest that things are getting worse. For instance, there has been an increase in children hospitalized for attempted suicide or suicidal indicators. The most concerning thing about this is that these incidents tend to be clustered around certain times of the year. One of the most likely times for a child or young adult to need hospitalization because of an attempted suicide or suicidal tendencies is in the fall when schools are opening back up. And there are a few likely reasons for this. One, being bullied and ridiculed by their peers makes students feel like social outcasts. Evolution has programmed the human mind to want acceptance from the group for survival reasons. So being ostracized can make you feel like you're literally going to die, because if this was 10,000 years ago, you probably would. And then there are the drugs. You know, the legalized forms of meth that we prescribe to kids to make them alert and focused, or calm and manageable. There are all sorts of side effects to these drugs. And based on the spiking and dropping levels of dopamine and other chemicals in the brain, this can cause erratic behavior. Finally, being forced into an institution against your will, having to ask permission to use the bathroom, and being told when to eat, sit, walk, is a deeply frustrating situation to be in. This lack of control and desperation to be free causes psychological damage. The school system is definitely the root of the problem, where it begins. But this is only preparing students for an equally coercive society after graduation. Coercion is ruining society. It shouldn't be surprising that coercion is a serious problem that can lead to mental health issues. Coercion might even be the root cause of most of the social problems that we see in society today. The same thing that makes a teenager lash out and rebel in opposition to strict rules is what makes people do crazy things in a society dominated by arbitrary and oppressive governments. Bruce Levin, PhD, explains this in his article, "Societies with little coercion have little mental illness." Coercion, the use of physical, legal, chemical, psychological, financial, and other forces to gain compliance, is intrinsic to our society's employment, schooling, and parenting. However, coercion results in fear and resentment, which are fuels for miserable marriages, unhappy families, and what we today call mental illness. It starts with the kids. Most parents have their kids' best interests at heart when they're parenting. Yet some still treat their child like a wild animal that must be broken. So many people in our society would have no idea what to do with freedom if they ever got it, because all they have ever known is oppression. It starts in childhood, and evidence suggests that a freer childhood leads to a happier adult. Levin points out that some cultures have very little mental illness, and he suggests that it's because of the way the children are raised. For many indigenous peoples, even the majority rule that most Americans call democracy is problematically coercive, as it results in the minority feeling resentful. Roland Christian, member of the Oneida Nation and Confederacy of the Haudenosaunee, and author of The Circle Game, points out that for his people, it is deemed valuable to spend whatever time necessary to achieve consensus, so as to prevent such resentment. By the standards of Western civilization, this is highly inefficient. Achieving consensus could take forever, exclaimed one attendee at a talk that I heard given by Christian, who responded, "What else is there more important to do?" Among indigenous societies, there are many accounts of a lack of mental illness, a minimum of coercion, and wisdom that coercion creates resentment, which fractures relationships. All interactions should be voluntary and consensual. Let kids be who they want to be, with the steady hand of your guidance, not an iron fist. Clearly, a child cannot always get what they want. That would create a spoiled brat. But that doesn't negate how important freedom is for children to learn and grow. This is why the public school system is horribly damaging to a large percentage of children. That's not the only or the most effective way to teach kids. In fact, it really just teaches them obedience to authority. Public school sets kids up to be mindless drones in the workforce, where they'll be used to coercion, but still not happy about it. Jared Diamond, in The World Until Yesterday, reports how laissez-faire parenting is not unusual by the standards of the world's hunter-gatherer societies, many of which consider young children to be autonomous individuals whose desires should not be thwarted. Diamond concludes that by our society's attempt to control children, for what we believe is their own good, we discourage those traits we admire. Other Westerners and I are struck by the emotional security, self-confidence, curiosity, and autonomy of members of small-scale societies, not only as adults but already as children. We see that people in small-scale societies spend far more time talking to each other than we do, and they spend no time at all on passive entertainment supplied by outsiders, such as television, video games, and books. We are struck by the precocious development of social skills in their children. These are qualities that most of us admire and would like to see in our own children, but we discourage development of those qualities by ranking and grading our children and constantly telling them what to do. Quick note about Jared Diamond. Some of you may have a problem with some of his views, but even if the conclusions he draws are sometimes flawed, I think he has a lot to contribute in terms of his data. We don't have to agree with everything he says in order to derive some benefit from his writings. It's really just a matter of being able to separate the science from his opinions or the spin. Then it's your job. I don't think the reason so many people hate going to work is the work itself. I think it's the fact that we can't be ourselves when we're at work. Leading a life of quiet desperation, as Thoreau and later Pink Floyd put it, of a 9-to-5 you hate. Saving for retirement, but probably drinking yourself to death before you ever get to enjoy it. Is that really the way to live? Critics of schooling, from Henry David Thoreau to Paul Goodman to John Taylor Gatto, have understood that coercive and unengaging schooling is necessary to ensure that young people more readily accept coercive and unengaging employment. And as I reported in the same article, a June 2013 Gallup poll revealed that 70% of Americans hate their jobs or have checked out of them. Unengaging employment and schooling require all kinds of coercions for participation, and human beings pay a psychological price for this. In nearly 3 decades of clinical practice, I have found that coercion is often the source of suffering. In all societies, there are coercions to behave in culturally agreed upon ways. For example, in many indigenous cultures, there is peer pressure to be courageous and honest. However, in modernity, we have institutional coercions that compel us to behave in ways that we do not respect or value. Parents, afraid that their children will lack credentials necessary for employment, routinely coerce their children to comply with coercive schooling that was unpleasant for these parents as children. And though 70% of us hate or are disengaged from our jobs, we are coerced by fear of poverty and homelessness to seek and maintain employment. In our society, we are taught that accepting institutional coercion is required for survival. We discover a variety of ways, including drugs and alcohol, to deny resentment. And the government is perfectly happy with this arrangement, because it is easier to control and tax normal people who simply go to work every day. How the government exacerbates the problem. We cannot even simply live on a piece of land without being coerced by the government to work in order to earn money in order to pay property taxes. But we have to earn more than just the amount that we have to pay in property taxes, because we're taxed on our income as well. We're taxed on the vehicle and the gas that get us to work, in a vicious cycle which forces us to earn more only to be taxed on that as well. Governments have piled so many laws, regulations, and statutes on top of each other that you can't go through life without being told that perfectly normal, non-violent behavior is wrong. I think this highlights the root cause of mass shootings, for example, the last desperate act of a coerced man. Of course, their response is insane, and sometimes related to the drugs they take. Drugs which are also a response to the quiet desperation of a coercive society. The hopelessness of being coerced is one of those deep, gut-wrenching feelings of despair which grow inside some people until they burst. But now imagine that the government has taken everything from you. They prevent you from starting a business, building your dream job, or pursuing happiness. The government takes people's kids and shoots people's dogs for no reason. Sadly, all these things happen relatively regularly in the land of the free. And even those of us who never face such extreme oppression are inundated daily with the burdens and restrictions of government. They tell us what we can and cannot put into our bodies. They tell us that we have to ask permission to earn a living or trade goods and services. They never tire of thinking of new rules, new laws, and new regulations, all hoops to jump through just to live a normal life. One false move, and the government brings crushing blows down on you, culminating in physically kidnapping and caging you, often for victimless crimes when you haven't hurt anyone. And the COVID-19 pandemic has only emboldened politicians to micromanage every facet of your life. Permission just to leave your home or open up your business. You know, many of us are baffled by why somebody would become a terrorist, especially a suicide bomber, for example. Again, the Middle East has plenty of coercion of their own, but part of the problem is the coercion that they're smothered in by the US foreign policy. Imagine losing your childhood because you're afraid to go outside because of the American drones. Imagine family members having been murdered by laughing soldiers. Imagine all your hopes and dreams bombed away in the blink of an eye. Again, this is the unfortunate reality that many people in the world live with today. And now we are seeing the US equipment and tactics coming home to be used against the American people. Bruce Levin finishes the essay writing, "In the 1970s, prior to the domination of the biopsychiatry big pharma partnership, many mental health professionals took seriously the impact of coercion and resentful relationships on mental health. And in a cultural climate more favorable than our current one for critical reflection of society, authors such as Erich Fromm, who addressed the relationship between society and mental health, were taken seriously, even within popular culture. But then psychiatry went to bed with big pharma and its big money, and their partnership has helped bury the common sense reality that an extremely coercive society creates enormous fear and resentment, which results in miserable marriages, unhappy families, and severe emotional and behavioral problems." Thanks for tuning into this really important discussion, and please don't forget to leave some comments to tell me what you think, throw me a like, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'm Joe Jarvis, thanks for watching, and come back and see me again soon.